Hi everyone, today we are going to review another horrible case with you. Please support my channel, click on subscribe and on the bell. Fatal love from the past. Kindness has the power not only to save the world, but also to destroy the one who brings it to others. The natural desire to help everyone, to protect, to guard, to save, and to prevent harm often leads to tragedy. It is important to recognize which people should not be helped, and even more so, to avoid covering for them in the hope that they will realize their mistake and change. The story of Cecilia Haddad is a vivid example of how believing in the best and the desire to protect someone once dear can first poison and then take a life. She feared harming her former lover in any way, but he had no fear in dealing with her and fleeing to the other side of the world, hoping justice wouldn't reach him there. An unidentified body in the river. On an early spring morning, Sunday, April 29, 2018, a man fishing on Lane Cove River, a northern tributary of the Parramatta River in Sydney, Australia, came upon a horrific scene. Floating downstream, face down, was something resembling a human body. The elderly fisherman couldn't believe his eyes at first and even thought it was a mistake, but within minutes, all doubts vanished. It was the body of a young woman with long dark hair. The man immediately reported the incident to the police, and soon, a few dozen feet downstream, the lifeless body of a young woman showing signs of violent death was pulled from the river. She had no identification or mobile phone on her, so investigators were tasked with identifying the deceased and determining the circumstances of the tragedy. The version that the incident was an accident was dismissed during the initial examination of the remains. The body was still fresh, having spent less than a day in the water. Clear strangulation marks were visible on her neck, and there were defensive wounds on her hands, indicating that the victim had fought desperately when she was attacked. The victim was dressed in a t-shirt and wide pants with many large pockets, which were stuffed with stones. It was obvious that the criminal had hoped the body, weighed down by the extra load, would sink and not be discovered anytime soon. However, some of the stones likely fell out since the pockets had no fasteners, allowing the body to simply float downstream. A toxicology report revealed no traces of alcohol, prohibited substances, or strong drugs in the victim's system. There were also no signs of intimate violence on the body. As initially suspected, the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. She had been strangled with bare hands. The victim appeared to be around 35 to 40 years old, so the police immediately checked reports of missing women within this age range. By the afternoon, they had identified the deceased after relatives reported the disappearance of 38-year-old Cecilia Haddad, who had suddenly stopped responding on April 28th and missed an important work meeting. A glance at Cecilia's photo convinced detectives that it was her body that had been pulled from the river, and relatives arriving for identification confirmed the fact. But who could have so cruelly dealt with a young woman and successful entrepreneur known for her active charity work? However, the name of the main suspect was almost immediately identified, but by that time, he was already on another continent. Who was Cecilia Haddad? Cecilia Bruna Haddad was born in the fall of 1979 in the bustling metropolis of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. She grew up in a close-knit, middle-class family where her parents did everything they could to provide their many children with a good education and all the necessities. From a young age, Cecilia was very smart, responsible, and goal-oriented. She became one of the best students in her school and dreamed of continuing her education at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. Additionally, Cecilia had a kind heart. She couldn't ignore someone else's misfortune and always tried to help within her abilities. Those around her described her as a compassionate, caring, and generous young woman, always ready to lend a hand. After finishing school, Haddad became a student at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, one of Brazil's leading private universities. There, she earned both her bachelor's and master's degrees in engineering. After receiving her diploma, Cecilia successfully passed an interview at a major mining company, where she was eagerly hired. Almost immediately, her career took off, and within a year, she became a leading specialist. In 2007, at the age of 27, the Brazilian woman decided to dramatically change her life and moved to Australia after receiving an enticing job offer. Cecilia fully understood the challenges she would face being in a foreign country, far from her loved ones and friends, but she decided to take the risk. Cecilia was fluent in Spanish and Portuguese, her native languages, but had to learn English almost from scratch, a task she handled successfully and quickly. Haddad took a managerial position at one of Australia's largest mining companies and quickly fit in with the team. The sweet, sociable, and friendly woman made many friends and began actively engaging in charity work and volunteering, helping people and homeless animals. Alongside this, she developed a new hobby, hiking and skiing in the mountains. In 2016, Cecilia founded her own consulting company, which supported and guided people looking to start their own businesses. Her clients included both native Australians and immigrants who had come to the country in search of a better life, just as she had once done. Personal life. Working at the aforementioned major Australian industrial company, Cecilia earned a good salary and could afford whatever she wanted. When she started her own business, she was able to bring her younger brother and sister from Brazil, helping them find jobs and supporting them financially at first. Overall, things were going well for Cecilia. She traveled, earned a second higher education, and lived life to the fullest. However, in terms of her personal life, Haddad was far less fortunate. Back in her student days, in her hometown of Rio de Janeiro, she entered into a romantic relationship with Mario Marcelo Santoro, a man 7 years her senior and her complete opposite. The young man was lazy, unambitious, and didn't aspire to much. But Cecilia loved him, always trying to help and motivate him toward success. In the end, when Cecilia received a job offer from Australia, Mario refused to go with her, fearing the challenges they would face in a new country. However, the young woman wasn't about to give up on her dream, one she had worked so hard for, and after prolonged but fruitless persuasion, she left alone. In the mid-2000s, while working in Sydney, Cecilia began an office romance with one of her colleagues. This relationship led to marriage, but the union was short-lived, lasting less than 3 years. The couple didn't have children, and they parted ways amicably, without hard feelings or resentment. They even maintained a friendly relationship afterward. A blast from the past. In 2016, shortly after her divorce, Cecilia decided to fly home to visit her parents and old friends. By that time, she had already left her job and was successfully growing her own business. She looked fantastic, enthusiastically talked about her life in Australia, and eagerly made plans for the future. On the third day of her stay, Haddad unexpectedly ran into Mario, whom she hadn't seen in 9 years since she emigrated to Australia. The man was shocked by the success his former girlfriend had achieved, while he himself was barely making ends meet. This chance encounter turned out to be fateful for Cecilia, who suddenly realized that she still had tender feelings for her ex-boyfriend. For the next few days, the two spent time walking around their favorite places where they had once been happy. After Cecilia returned to Sydney, they continued to talk and text every day. Within a month, Cecilia bought Mario a plane ticket and essentially brought him to live with her, deciding he was the man she would be happy with for the rest of her life. The couple settled in Cecilia's spacious apartment in an elite residential complex, and for a time, she fully supported her beloved. Later, using her connections, she helped him secure a good position with a high salary and actively encouraged his career growth. Haddad was once again in love, just like in her youth, and failed to notice that her partner was simply taking advantage of the situation. Toxic relationship. Shortly after the couple moved in together, their relationship began to deteriorate. The man became jealous, domineering, and tried to control every aspect of Cecilia's life. However, independent and strong-willed, Cecilia refused to be manipulated. On top of that, Mario started meddling in her business, wanting a share since he didn't like working for someone else. The couple frequently argued, but Haddad always tried to resolve conflicts, seeking compromises and making every effort to save the relationship. Yet, her partner was simply draining her emotionally, monitoring her actions, taking her phone and work laptop without permission, and trying to limit her social circle. Cecilia endured this situation for almost a year, but finally decided to have an honest conversation and informed Mario of her intention to break up. This news infuriated him. He started yelling and insulting Cecilia, and when she tried to calm him down, he struck her across the face. He had been physically aggressive before, pushing her or grabbing her arms hard enough to leave bruises, but this was the first time he had hit her. This was the last straw, and Haddad simply showed him the door. At first, Santoro tried to beg for her forgiveness. He sent her touching messages, apologized, and sent flowers and gifts. But Cecilia remained firm. Realizing he couldn't fix things, the man changed tactics, resorting to threats and intimidation. From that point on, he began stalking his ex-girlfriend, turning her life into a nightmare. Obsessed stalker. After the breakup, Mario rented an apartment in a complex just 10 minutes away from Cecilia's home. He called her daily, sent dozens of messages, and constantly tried to meet her, waiting at her front door. Cecilia still tried to reason with him, hoping to resolve the conflict peacefully, and believed that her ex would calm down. In January 2018, late in the evening, Santoro showed up at Haddad's apartment again. At first, she didn't want to let him in, but he was persistent and forced his way inside. He attacked the petite woman, but she miraculously managed to escape and barricade herself in another room. While the stalker tried to break down the door, she pleaded with him to stop, think, and leave. Eventually, Cecilia threatened to call the police, and only then did Mario calm down and leave her home. Cecilia didn't report the incident to law enforcement, nor did she mention that Mario had been stalking her for months and threatening her. She knew that his visa had expired, and that if he came to the authorities' attention, he would be deported back to Brazil immediately. Cecilia pitied the man she once loved, knowing that back home, he would return to his worthless life. Despite this, Haddad understood that staying in her apartment was no longer safe, so she temporarily moved in with her sister Carol and then spent about a month living with a close friend named Rita. Both women urged Cecilia to file a police report, sensing that this situation could end in tragedy, but she was still afraid of harming her tormentor. She hoped that he would realize the error of his ways, calm down, and leave her alone. Most importantly, she didn't believe that her ex-boyfriend was capable of causing her any serious physical harm. When Cecilia returned to her apartment in early April 2018, she realized that Mario had been there several times in her absence. She was horrified to discover that he had a spare set of keys, which he had initially returned after the breakup, but took back when he forced his way in during the night. Neighbors also confirmed that they had seen Santoro near the complex multiple times, and even going up to the floor where Haddad's apartment was located. When they reasonably suggested she go to the police, Cecilia again refused, assuring them she would handle the situation herself. She planned to change the locks, but decided to live incognito for the time being, not drawing attention to herself, to see if her stalker would leave her alone. For over 2 weeks, Cecilia acted as though she wasn't home. She didn't turn on the lights, tried to stay quiet, and only came and went when she was sure Mario wasn't around. At the slightest suspicion, she would spend the night at her sister's or a friend's. The stress almost caused her to have a breakdown, but then, suddenly, everything changed in an instant. Strange goodbye. On April 25, 2018, Mario unexpectedly called Cecilia and, in a calm voice, said that he had realized everything and would no longer bother her. He also apologized and informed her that he had bought tickets for a flight to Rio de Janeiro. He planned to leave early in the morning on April 28th and asked if she would meet him one last time to say goodbye. Haddad agreed, but said she would meet him directly at the airport, where they could see each other and talk. After this call, it was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her stalker and tormentor had decided to leave on his own, and she believed he would no longer disturb her. Overjoyed, she called her sister and told her everything. But Carol was not as thrilled and suspected something was off. She begged Cecilia not to meet with Mario, but Cecilia dismissed her concerns, assuring her that everything would be fine and that nothing could happen to her at the airport. Cecilia was excited at the thought that her nightmare was finally ending and that she could start a new life. Sadly, that miracle did not happen. Mysterious disappearance. On Saturday, April 28th, Cecilia was supposed to arrive at Sydney International Airport by 7 a.m. to see her ex-boyfriend off and say a final goodbye. Afterward, she had an important work meeting scheduled and another in the afternoon. The night before, Cecilia had one last call with her sister, telling her about her plans. Carol again tried to dissuade her from meeting her ex, but Cecilia was adamant. She insisted that she needed to see for herself that Mario boarded the plane and would no longer bother her. The two sisters talked for about an hour, and Cecilia promised to call as soon as he left. However, the next day, instead of a call, a rather strange message arrived from Haddad. She said she was heading to the mountains for a couple of days because she needed to reflect on everything that had happened and clear her head. Carol tried to call her, but the phone was already turned off. Soon, it became clear that similar messages had been sent to several of Cecilia's friends and colleagues, and she had not shown up for any of her scheduled meetings, which was completely out of character for her. That evening, Cecilia's family and friends reported her missing to the police, providing the name and details of the potential suspect. At that time, they still hoped she was alive, but by the next morning, all hope was shattered when her sister was called to identify her body. Investigation and evidence search. On April 29th, the police combed the riverbank upstream, searching for clues or evidence. They found a discarded pair of men's shoes soaked through in the grass. Detectives speculated that the criminal didn't want to leave tracks and decided to dispose of the shoes. In the victim's apartment, dried footprints left by wet socks were found. But why did he return to the victim's apartment after dealing with her? Since Mario didn't own a car, he used the vehicle of the woman he had deprived of life to dispose of her body. Sand, fragments of coastal vegetation, and puddles of river water were found inside the car. Additionally, numerous fingerprints belonging to the suspect were discovered. Moreover, almost all of Santoro's movements were tracked through his cell phone signal, and he was caught on several street surveillance cameras. It was determined that Mario took a taxi to the airport. Authorities quickly located the driver, who agreed to speak with them. The driver claimed the passenger was calm, but asked for a significant detour to pass over a small bridge crossing a river away from the bustling city roads. There, he asked to stop, got out, and threw a bag into the water, as well as something resembling a set of keys. He then returned to the car and they continued the journey. The driver took the police to that very bridge. Divers were called to the scene and spent hours searching the riverbed for evidence. Fortunately, the current in that spot was weak, so they soon found the mysterious bag, followed by the set of keys. Inside the bag were the victim's cell phone, work laptop, some documents, a wallet, and personal items. It was clear the suspect was trying to create the illusion that the woman had left town, so people would believe she had indeed gone to the mountains. He also disposed of all duplicate keys to make it harder to access the apartment. By the time Cecilia's body was pulled from the river, the perpetrator had already landed in Rio de Janeiro, convinced that he would never be caught and would escape punishment. Retrieving a criminal on another continent is indeed a challenge, but with no doubt left about his involvement in the crime, Interpol was called in. The manhunt expanded internationally, drawing significant media attention. Search and arrest of the suspect. Only after Australian police gathered and presented irrefutable evidence linking the Brazilian citizen to the brutal crime was Mario officially declared wanted in his home country. He was finally apprehended on July 7, 2018, at a friend's apartment, where he had been staying the entire time. Santoro didn't resist arrest, but immediately requested a lawyer. During the initial interrogations, he denied his guilt, but soon, under the weight of overwhelming evidence, he began confessing. However, even as he admitted to the crime, he desperately tried to blame the victim. Mario claimed that it wasn't him, but his former girlfriend, who had been stalking him after their breakup and wouldn't let him live in peace. He said he decided to leave the country just to escape her, but Cecilia allegedly stole his passport to prevent him from leaving. That morning, according to him, he went to her apartment to retrieve his document without which he couldn't board the plane, but she refused to return it. A struggle ensued, and he accidentally ended her life. The accused claimed he tried to resuscitate Haddad, performing CPR and chest compressions. However, when he realized she was gone, he panicked and attempted to cover his tracks by disposing of her body and the evidence. His best idea, he said, was to dump everything in the river. Reconstructing the timeline of events. Reconstructing the timeline of that tragic day was a painstaking process since Mario constantly changed his testimony and tried to confuse the investigation to minimize his guilt. He played on sympathy, even attempting to cry, but no one believed his version of events. The victim's family, friends, and colleagues all testified against Santoro as they had witnessed how he had made Cecilia's life a nightmare. According to the investigation, by the time Mario purchased his plane tickets, he had already decided to take the life of his former girlfriend and was meticulously planning the details. On Saturday, April 28th, around 5:30 a.m., he arrived at Cecilia's building and rang the intercom. Cecilia wasn't expecting him and thought they would meet at the airport. Feeling uneasy, she didn't want to let him in. A few minutes later, the man opened the door using a spare key he had and climbed the stairs to Cecilia's apartment. It's likely she let him in because otherwise the neighbors would have heard some noise, but they reported hearing nothing unusual. Mario immediately attacked Cecilia, strangling her and not giving her a chance to scream or call for help. She fought back desperately, as evidenced by the bruises and hematomas on her arms, but she was overpowered. After ending her life, he wrapped the body in a blanket, took the keys to her car, and quietly made his way to the parking lot while all the residents were still asleep. He drove to a secluded spot by the river, filled her pants pockets with rocks, and submerged her body in the water, hoping it wouldn't be discovered anytime soon. During this process, the suspect soaked his shoes and decided to discard them to avoid leaving any traces, as he planned to return to her apartment. Around 7 a.m., Mario returned to Cecilia's building using her car. He went back up to her apartment and quickly gathered some of her belongings, including documents and her laptop, to simulate her departure. He also sent text messages from her phone to family members and several friends, pretending she had suddenly gone on a trip to the mountains. He later put the phone in the same bag, which he threw from the bridge into the river. After completing this, Mario walked back to his own apartment where his suitcase was already packed. He showered, changed his clothes, and soaked the ones he had been wearing in bleach to destroy any potential evidence, then called a taxi to the airport. On the way, he asked the driver to make a detour to dispose of Cecilia's belongings, and within an hour, he calmly boarded a plane, convinced he would never be held accountable for his actions. The trial and verdict. Since the accused was a Brazilian citizen, he could not be extradited to another continent to stand trial for the crime he committed. However, the countries managed to reach an agreement and resolve legal differences to ensure the trial would be as fair as possible, although the suspect would serve his sentence in his home country. The bureaucratic hurdles and investigation process took some time, and the trial didn't begin until June 2023. Delegates from Australia, who had been directly involved in the investigation, traveled to Rio de Janeiro to participate in the trial. Throughout the proceedings, the defendant tried to evoke pity from the judges, crying and claiming to feel remorse, insisting he didn't understand how things had gone so wrong. On July 1st, 2023, Mario Santoro was found guilty of premeditated crime, as well as tampering with evidence and attempting to mislead the investigation. He was sentenced to 27 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The convicted man and his lawyers repeatedly tried to appeal the sentence, but the court upheld its decision. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to my channel. There are many shocking stories ahead of you.